In this video I'm gonna give an overview of pretty much every Stone Age movie ever made. In fact, right here you're looking at the entire micro-genre of Stone Age movies. Just 25 titles in over 100 years of cinema. Now I thought it would be interesting to discuss these films in chronological order. That is, not in the order they were released, but in the order that the story is set. And each movie will get partly a review and also a bit of scientific analysis. This will be done in reference to the archaeological timescale, which divides up time based on the technological developments of humanity. Here the Stone Age is also called the Paleolithic. And from its beginning, over 3 million years ago, humanity underwent radical changes both in terms of our brain and also in terms of our social capabilities. Now the point is to see whether all these Stone Age movies to any degree match up with these developments. Well, sometimes they do, and sometimes they really don't. To be clear, I'm not gonna include any of those fake, half-assed movies where somehow a caveman got frozen until today, or some modern adventurers traveled through time or whatever. No, we're gonna talk only about Stone Age movies proper. Films that, accurately or not, depict humans in the time when everyone was still hunting and gathering. Or slightly after, but we'll get to that. I'll warn you, these films differ a lot in terms of quality, and we have to work through a couple of really bad ones. But some are true cinematic gold. Now, what other film to begin with than 2001: A Space Odyssey? Though mostly a science fiction film, this classic by Stanley Kubrick starts out at the dawn of man, when humans were still ape-like and didn't know how to use tools. But thanks to a strange monolith sent by mysterious aliens, these creatures manifest a desire to use a bone to kill off their enemies. This victory sets off a cascade of fierce competition, eventually leading to the Space Age. We know, of course, when the future scene is set. It's 2001. But when exactly is the dawn of man? Well, we do get a hint later in the film. In the story, scientists discover another monolith on the surface of the moon, and on the way there, they report the following.
No, the only thing we're sure of is it was buried 4 million years ago.
Now, based on this, we could assume the other monolith was also placed 4 million years ago, and archaeologically speaking, this makes kind of sense. The first crude stone tools come from about 3.3 million years ago. So it's not unreasonable to assume that before that people started first with just bones. Anyway, it's time to move on. Next comes immediately one of the worst Stone Age movies for sure, set about 1 zillion years BC. Caveman. You might say that 1 zillion is more than 4 million, but zillion isn't really a number, and I felt it just didn't earn the first spot. Honestly, Caveman doesn't have much of a story, it's just a load of gags, and not very good ones. It's basically a parody of older Stone Age movies, but those were already ridiculous, so it doesn't really work. I wouldn't recommend watching this movie, but there's one redeeming quality. It's got Ringo Starr, who, as a fun fact, met his wife on set. And now on the timeline we have the Croods. If Wikipedia is to be believed, this DreamWorks animation is set in the Cretaceous, fictional era of the Pliocene, putting it at about 5 to 2.5 million years ago. I should note that the Pliocene is part of the geological timescale, which is markedly different from the archaeological one. It can be a bit confusing because they overlap and they both get used in discourse about prehistory. It's a bit too much to dive into now, but it's good to remember that both of these timescales take the end of the Ice Age as a turning point. Now, what I don't like about the Croods is that it misrepresents the Stone Age in an unnecessary way. And I don't mean the goofy action scenes that are happening all the time, but two more basic things. In the story, the Croods family comes into contact with a human that knows how to make fire. But the weird thing is that they make it seem as if the people had never seen fire before.
What?
Ah! Rah rah! Ah! The sun is in his hands!
No, it's fire. Where did it come from?
He made it.
Make some for me.
But this doesn't make a lot of sense, because wildfires would have been a very common occurrence for early humans. The film does seem to point to the era in human history where we had fire, we had the active use of fire, but just didn't know how to make it ourselves. This is actually the setting for the really cool film called Quest for Fire, which we're gonna talk about later. In The Croods, however, they just distort the past to make a couple of jokes, and I think that's lame. But the main thing that annoys me in this movie is the fantasy animals. Why come up with these elaborate, nonsensical creatures when there's plenty of weird stuff from the Pliocene itself to go on? I would say it's a missed opportunity to mix entertainment with education. Now, I know it's a kids movie, and I'm an adult, so it's not meant for me, but it doesn't have to be this way. You can also make a movie like Ice Age, which is great. Sadly, we're not there yet, it's way later on the timeline. First, we're gonna look at a couple of real classic pieces of cinema, all set at about 1 million years ago. In 1940, while Europe was being ravaged by Nazis, Americans sought escapism like never before. They found it in 1 million BC. Just to be clear, 1,000,000 years BC is not the same as 1,000,000 years ago, it's actually 1,002,000 years ago, which is why it's got that little squiggle there on the timeline. Anyway, there's something about that number, 1,000,000 years, that really lets the imagination go wild. I mean, who really knows what happened that long ago? Probably people lived in small tribes and spoke with grunts, and they were white, and oh yeah, they were also watching giant lizards fight to the death. Yes, this is all real, I'm not even showing the worst. In fact, this movie was so bad with its treatment of animals, it spawned a movement to regulate animal abuse in the film industry. Well, congrats guys. In the end, this film was mostly remembered for its special effects, which were actually reused by dozens of films after. If you're looking for something entertaining though, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. It's just kinda slow, and the animal cruelty is really painful. Much more fun to watch is the 1966 remake 1 million years BC. Here, instead of mutilating real animals, the filmmakers chose to use stop-motion animation, which honestly still looks pretty cool today. And it's got the absolutely iconic fur bikinis, which every single woman in the movie seems to wear. The story is one of the oldest known to man. A guy from the Bone tribe falls in love with a woman from the Shell tribe. And every time this plot dries up, dinosaurs. What's wrong about this, you may wonder? Well, this movie is set 1 million years ago and the dinosaurs died 66 million years ago. But nevertheless, just looking at this film as a portrait of the Stone Age is fascinating. On the one hand it's kinda dumb, but on the other hand it seems to represent some people's honest opinions. All the people are dirty and mean, people hardly talk except for a couple of grunts, and life seems nothing but a constant, brutal struggle. 1 million years BC may be hopelessly sexist and stupid, but it's a must-see for anybody interested in the Stone Age. The film was actually so successful that the studio behind it made 2 more shameless prehistoric spectacles. When Dinosaurs Ruled the Earth and Creatures the World Forgot. They're both more of the same and not in a good way. The last movie set at this point in time is Missing Link, which is a bit of an obscure film, and for good reasons. The story is about a Homo erectus, whose entire tribe is murdered by Homo sapiens. And after that, he just sort of wanders around for a bit. Yeah. Anyway, moving on, we're gonna take a look at a couple of really old short movies that don't really give an exact date to their story. So I thought to place them kind of in the middle of the timeline. Also, I should note they are made by some of the greatest filmmakers of all time. First, there's Man's Genesis, made in 1912 by no other than D.W. Griffith. The story is basically about 2 guys fighting over the love of a woman, which prompts one of the men to invent the first weapon. Now, as far as I know, this is the first ever depiction of the Stone Age in a film, which is interesting in its own right, but I think it's worthwhile to consider this film for a bit longer. Because even though it's largely forgotten nowadays, I think it has been highly influential. Consider this. Just 2 years later, we see another famous filmmaker getting in on the hype of the Stone Age. No other than Charlie Chaplin, with a short comedy called His Prehistoric Past. Now, something remarkable happens in this year. 1914 also saw the short animated film called Gertie the Dinosaur, which was hugely successful as well. Then Griffith comes out with a sequel to his first film called The Primitive Man, also known as Brute Force. Here, the story of the first film is extended, but there's also a couple of scenes with dinosaurs, and from then onwards these animals are forever mixed with the prehistoric genre. We can see this, for example, in Buster Keaton's The Three Ages from 1926, which has a couple of minutes about the Stone Age. However, the influence of man's genesis goes a lot further than just dinosaurs. In fact, it contains all the basic elements we see in Stone Age movies after, and I've made a little montage to illustrate this. First, of course, there's good old violence. There's the rough handling of women, and of course generally the sexual objectification of them. And it's got a nice, rocky setting. Fun fact, Griffith actually cooperated on 1 million BC here on the left, and his influence can clearly be seen in the next couple of scenes. I also found very strong similarities to the 60s remake. And also the fighting scene does really remind me of the fighting scene in 2001: A Space Odyssey. Now, in this last case, the comparison might not seem as strong, but there is actually pretty solid evidence that Kubrick took inspiration from Griffith in the films that he made. In 1997, Kubrick received the Directors Guild of America Lifetime Achievement Award, which at the time was called the D.W. Griffith Award. Kubrick wasn't able to attend the award ceremony, and so he recorded a video in which he stated the following.
I think there's an intriguing irony in naming the Lifetime Achievement Award after D.W. Griffith, because his career was both an inspiration and a cautionary tale. His best films will always rank among the most important films ever made, and some of them made him a great deal of money. He was instrumental in transforming movies from a Nickelodeon novelty to an art form, and he originated and formalized much of the syntax of movie making, now taken for granted.
So, with this in mind, the whole thing about inventing the first weapon, doesn't that remind you of anything? There's one more movie in the category without a clear date. It's the live-action version of the Flintstones? Yes, this movie is real. It was made in 1994 and it's got John Goodman in the lead role. Beforehand, I didn't think it would be any good, but honestly, it's pretty entertaining. The atmosphere is spot on, the set pieces are amazing, and it's just filled with gags that work pretty well. Now, of course, the Flintstones has zero pretense of giving an accurate portrayal of the Stone Age, but still it says something interesting about how we project an image onto that era. Thing is, we found very little from the Stone Age itself. Sure, we found a lot of tools, some burials, some art objects, but concerning the culture on the whole, the world behind these finds, we're basically in the dark. I mean, what were people like? Were they warlike or peaceful? Were they polygamous or monogamous? And what was the position of women in society?
Afraid? Now let's get this straight, Rubble. I don't need permission from my wife to make a decision. In my cave, I reign supreme. Supreme!
Archaeology cannot tell us whether men really were supreme in their caves, and so researchers often look to anthropology. The idea is that hunter-gatherers that lived in recent centuries can give us clues about the life of hunter-gatherers in the deep past. But we cannot just look at any tribe and claim they were an exact representation of what the Stone Age was like. The hunter-gatherers that have been described in the last couple of centuries differ a lot in terms of their ecology, their culture, and their level of contact with farmers. These are all factors we should take into account when we're making a comparison to the Stone Age. For example, if you're looking to make a good analogy for the people living on the icy tundras of late Ice Age Europe, the Amazon rainforest is probably not a place to look because the environment is so different. A much better analogy would come from the Inuit living in the Arctic Circle, right before the time that they would get into serious contact with traders. And late 20th century suburban America? Probably not. Of course, nobody seriously goes as far as the Flintstones did, but I think it's a good reminder of the fact that there's always a risk of bias when we're trying to reconstruct prehistory. Alright, that was it for part 1. Thank you guys for watching. This video essay was part of the preparation for a Stone Age movie I'm making myself. I've also made a short film about the Stone Age last year, you can check it out on my channel. Please like and subscribe, you can also support me on Patreon, and see you guys later.